In the revision sessions, we will cover all of the chemistry that you need to know for your exam. We shall start with atoms, which are the tiny particles that make up everything. An atom is made up of three things. The first is a proton, which is positively charged. Remember, P for positive. And this exists at the centre of the atom, which we call the nucleus. Also at the nucleus is a neutron, which is neutral and has no charge. The third part is an electron, and this is negatively charged. The electrons exist in the massive energy shells at the outside of the atom. And it's important to note that the nucleus is really small in comparison to the size of the whole atom because these energy shells are so large. Protons, neutrons and electrons can also be called subatomic particles. You need to know their relative charge and relative mass. Protons are positive, neutrons are neutral, so have no charge, and electrons are negative. And the mass of protons is 1, of neutrons is also 1, and of electrons is 0.005, so electrons have a really small mass. Elements are the different types of atoms that can exist. We can tell apart different atoms by the number of protons present in the nucleus because every atom of that element will have the same number of protons in the nucleus, and this is unique for every element. So as well as this, every element will have the same number of protons in the nucleus as they have electrons. So the first atom you can see has 2 electrons and 2 protons, and the second element has 3 protons and 3 elements. So these numbers are the same. So some important definitions we need to know are firstly atomic number, and this is the number of protons present in the nucleus. So for the first atom this would be 2, and for the second atom this would be 3. Another important definition is mass number, and this is the total number of atoms in the nucleus. So for the first atom this would be 4, and for the second atom this would be 6. Now from the periodic table we will get these symbols and we'll be able to abstract the number of protons and the number of atoms in the nucleus from the numbers which are listed. So the top number is the atomic number, the mass number, and the bottom number is the atomic number. Changing the number of protons an element has changes the type of element the element is. However, you can change the number of neutrons in an element without changing its element identity. Elements with different number of neutrons are called isotopes, and they have the same number of protons but just a different number of neutrons. So for example, the 2 elements both have 2 protons, however the one on the left has 2 neutrons and the one on the right has 3 neutrons. This means that they have different mass numbers and can mean that the relative atomic mass isn't always a whole number when you work out the relative abundance. The relative atomic mass is the mass of one atom of an element. So if the element exists in different isotopes, then the mass is going to be different due to the different number of neutrons present in that element. So the 2 elements we have here are the 2 isotopes we have here have different number of neutrons. So the one on the left has 18 neutrons and the one on the right has 20 neutrons, and this gives it a different mass. So to find out the overall atomic mass, we need to find out how much of the first isotope we have and how much of the second, and then work out the ratio to give us the overall relative atomic mass. So the first we have 10% and the second we have 90%. So we multiply the mass number of the first isotope by 10% and then do the same with the second, so times isotope 37 by 90% to calculate the overall relative atomic mass. So once we have these 2 values, we add them up and this gives us overall atomic mass. You will need to know how to work out electron configuration. Now this diagram shows the maximum occupancy of all of the surrounding electron shells. Now the first shell, which is the smallest one, can take a maximum of 2 electrons. The The second shell can take a maximum of 8, and the third shell can take also a maximum of 8. Now, when you have a number of electrons, you always fill the inner shells first. So if you had 2 electrons, the inner shell would be the only shell filled. If you had 3, you would have 2 on the inner shell and 1 on the second shell. And so on, as long as you obey the rules of never overfilling the 3 shells, so only 2 can go into the first shell, only 8 into the second, and only 8 into the third. Lastly, for this video, you need to know a few things about the periodic table. So the first thing is the periodic table can be split into metals and non-metals, and you just need to know that the metals are on the left side of the table and the non-metals are on the right side of the table, and you can see this from the line drawn on the periodic table. When you go across the periodic table, you increase the atomic number. So this is called a row, and as you go across the row from left to right, the atomic number increases. Another section of the periodic table are groups, and groups go vertically down, so from the top to the bottom of the table, and these groups will all have similar properties. And within these groups, as you start from the left of the table, it corresponds to the number of electrons they have in their outer shells. So the first group will have 1 electron in the outer shell, and the second will have 2, and so on and so on. I hope you found this video useful, and good luck with your revision and in your exam.